Saludos desde la Vanguardia y bienvenidos a este nuevo ciclo de conferencias que ya llamamos 22, le llamamos conferencias de sostenibilidad y vamos a hablar de cómo contabilizar la descarbonización. Hoy tenemos en esta edición a Lubomila Jordanova, que es fundadora y CEO de Plan A. Luego nos explicará qué es esto de Plan A. Es la corporación de referencia para contabilizar el carbono y proveer de herramientas, sobre todo a la industria, a las empresas, para esa descarbonización. Lubomila Jordanova también fundó Green Tech Alliance, una comunidad de más de 5.000 startups y más de 500 asesores de capital riesgo, medios de comunicación y empresas focalizadas en desarrollar tecnologías para revertir el cambio climático. También pertenece al Consejo Asesor Internacional para la Innovación Social del Ministerio Federal de Educación e Investigación de Alemania y forma parte del Consejo Asesor también del Comité de Sostenibilidad CLOE. Ha sido reconocida en diversos premios, como por ejemplo la Obama Leader Europe del año 22, la MIT de Innovator Under 35 en Europa 2022, el Marshall Fund Fellow en el 2022 también. Fue nominada una de las 50 mejores mujeres en tecnología en Alemania en el 21 y también por la revista Forbes como una de las mejores 30 menores de 30 años. Bueno, con todo este currículum y sobre todo expectantes de conocerla y escucharla, saludamos a Lubomila Jordanova. ¿Qué tal?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Bueno, pues como siempre el formato que utilizamos en estas charlas es primero escucharemos una presentación por parte de Lubomila Jordanova y después estableceremos a partir de lo que nos haya explicado una pequeña conversación con ella. Por lo tanto, cuando quiera, adelante.
Thank you so much once again for having me. I have a great pleasure to speak to you, especially in the context of some of the latest announcements that have been made in Spain with regards to the importance of the topic that we work on, sustainability. Sustainability in the business sphere has existed for a long time, but since the last 5 years it has become also legislation. There's laws, there's also frameworks, and there's now an expectation for businesses to take action. Why? I'll explain a little bit more in the coming slides. So we have a lot of different definitions on what sustainability really is. Some people might connect it to accelerated speed and scale of wildfires, other natural disasters like flooding, or drought, or even big natural disasters like hurricanes, tornadoes, and others. Other people connect it to a storytelling approach that is related to animals going extinct. There's others, and this is definitely the approach that I appreciate a lot, is the perspective of data. Data and science. Why? Because we have many decades of having generated knowledge on this topic, and there's a lot of reference points on validating that this data, unfortunately, confirms 1 year after the other that we have a lot of problems that we need to solve associated to the way we treat the planet and the way we prepare for the natural disasters that are happening now or upcoming. Here's an example of data that shows targets that our corporates have set and what essentially they've been able to achieve. I'll speak a little bit later what these targets mean, but ultimately this is an example of how you can understand and validate promises on sustainability by businesses or even just climate change statistics. We also know the reference point, and there's been a lot of activity in big cities in Spain by young people from organizations like Fridays for Future, going and demanding action for their future to be set up and for their future to be prepared for stability, and stability in which natural disasters wouldn't be day-to-day activity, and of course the corresponding economic collapse. Unfortunately, from today's perspective, even with all of these different ways of looking at sustainability and at climate change, we still are on a trajectory to be, unfortunately, facing even more disasters, even more economic issues related to the impacts of climate change. And I'll pause here just to explain what do I really mean, because regardless if you are, as a listener, informed on sustainability, or if you are maybe new to the topic, there's some key elements that connect climate change to the day-to-day of any business, of any individual, that we all need to understand in order to be prepared. Well, climate change is caused by a lot of different actions that we take as individuals. It is related to cutting trees and doing this in the form of removing forests. It is related to agricultural land that is utilizing fertilizers that are bad for the planet and therefore bad for the water systems. It is related to industrial emissions. It's related to this energy that is used for all of our production facilities, and is also related to animals. I'm sure that all of you know how, for example, for us to be able to eat beef, we actually are looking in, supporting the animals to have a lot of land, and essentially this land being used for their, as it's called in English, grazing. So what has all of these actions resulted in? You might think, okay, maybe I don't know how to impact this. I love eating meat, or I don't really understand water systems. Well, unfortunately, regardless of what business you are managing or what work you do as an employee or as an individual that is just a consumer, there is a lot of different costs associated to sustainability and the action, be it positive or negative, about climate change. The bottom line of today's reality is that the economy of the world is unfortunately heavily impacted by costs associated to climate change, and we are paying this bill today. It's nothing new, and there's a lot of data on it, but we are not all aligned on the actions that we need to take. And here I go back to actually what has been decided in Spain, which is now that there's a legislation to acknowledge these costs and require businesses to report on their actions on climate. From today's perspective, we are far away from being in line with a tangible plan to be able to reduce emissions, because every single country, every single continent has decided by itself on how they take action. And global action, as discussed at meetings in the United Nations or in meetings that are pan-European or international, doesn't always result in aligned action that is scaling, because even today we are increasing our emissions on the planet. Let me explain a little bit more about the way we actually should understand this topic of emissions. What is this accounting that was mentioned by our host today? Carbon accounting is a system of calculating emissions in different domains of the existence of a business. If you take a fashion company, every single piece of textile, the logistics that are associated to the transportation of a particular product, investments, packaging, also the water usage, the way the product is being used, the electricity, the cars even of the employees, they all contribute to these carbon emissions. For every single industry, there's a different mix of emissions that exist. And all of those now, especially in Europe, will be reported on. And everyone needs to know what actions they are taking in order to be better to the planet. In the context of the legislation, you might think, okay, but what exactly does this mean for my business or for me as an individual? For the last, especially 8 years, there has been a lot of action that has been taken on putting legislation and putting formats for businesses to take action in order to reduce their emissions. And conveniently, the legislation actually explains the reasons for having to report by explaining the benefits financially to businesses, how much money you can save, how much also money you can make by being more sustainable. In Europe in particular, there's the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and in Spain, since 2 weeks, there is officially the decree that has been launched by the highest institutions in order to require companies to report as of this year already. So you might think, okay, how does this connect to financial accounting? As we know, businesses on a monthly and on a quarterly and on a yearly basis report in a balance sheet, in a financial statement, their performance. Consider this as a non-financial accounting. This is the accounting that is adding a set of KPIs that need to be included in the reporting that is done as per usual. And conveniently, this is not something where each person can be, making their own choice on the format. There's very clear, very simple formats in order to be able to report. You might wonder, and I'm putting a cynical hat on, why do I care? Okay, they make me put together a report, but what is the real problem? Well, the problem is that climate change, beyond the natural disasters, is starting to impact the economy. Our economy globally looks like this, a really quite unstable line that goes up and down and ultimately doesn't really fluctuate positively. Especially since COVID, we have been dealing with one disaster after another and financial situation that is across the board unstable, with, of course, this resulting in GDP in the individual countries not doing so well. A few calls of action to finish, which are important for you to take for yourself and know that these examples are not of a topic that is new to everyone. Maybe it's new to you, but you shouldn't worry that this is something that now all of a sudden the world is starting to work on. There has been decades of work that has been done. I myself am the founder of a company called Plan A, and we have developed a software for this. There's ways in which technology can help, there's ways in which spreadsheets can help, but there's many ways in which you can solve for preparing for a report. The bigger problem, though, that we need to solve is climate change, because the reporting is one element, but climate change and the natural disasters that are ahead of us, and they're happening, and unfortunately, in Europe a lot more than ever, with wildfires like the ones in Spain, in Portugal, in Italy, in Bulgaria, where I come from, and also in other places, floods, and there's been also drought in places like Germany. All of these kinds of events are unfortunately impacting our economy. The convenience is that climate change is a longevity game, which means that we need to take care of our own actions today in order to be able to see a future that is more stable. And for those of you that are more informed, you might say, well, we've already, unfortunately, have messed it up. We don't have a choice of turning it around. To some extent, it is true. But we have the chance to secure at least a scenario where the temperatures do not go that high up and the natural disasters and disturbances are not that many, more than the ones that we have now. So you might wonder, okay, what are my scenarios? What are my actions? In a few minutes, I quickly just explain this. We currently are on a trajectory to hit 2 degrees Celsius increase. That means that places in Africa, places in Asia won't be livable in the next few months and years. In Europe, we have already 1.7 in some places degrees of temperature increase, and this fluctuates depending on the year. We have scenarios that have been developed for this not to continue. But that means action, that means reduction of consumption of plastics, reduction of consumption of also materials that are bad for our planet. Moving to renewable energy, Spain is doing a great job with solar and with other types, also across Europe, also across Asia. This is the cheapest energy that exists out there at the moment, so it's even economically viable. And there's also ways in which we can take this into a more practical example. I finish off with a few examples, and this is by giving you the example of a t-shirt. You might think, okay, how does this have to do with anything that we do? Here is an example of what a t-shirt costs on one website. You can find it for $1,200. This is absolutely absurd. But then you have places where you find it for $2. You might wonder, why is there this big difference? And I'm sure that someone, I know it as a consumer myself, sometimes I go on a website and I see something and I want to buy it and I find it 10 times cheaper. You might wonder, why does this difference exist? Well, the truth is that this cost is not valid, neither on the $2 side, neither on the $1,250 side. The truth is somewhere in the middle, where all of these different building blocks are accounted for. The materials, the environmental cost, the insurance, and also the biodiversity associated to it. So, yes, we don't work maybe in a reality where a t-shirt costs $2 and $1,250, but we actually need to understand that for our economy to exist, we are paying a high bill, and that is coming to be the result of the negative impacts that we see that are unfortunately increasing the scale and speed with which climate change is unfolding. I look forward to the conversation. Thank you so much for giving me the chance to share this presentation.
Pues muchas gracias por esta presentación y vamos a establecer ahora esta conversación a partir de lo que ha explicado y también a partir de informaciones que naturalmente van llegando durante las últimas semanas, y algunas son esperanzadoras y otras parece que no, pero bueno, le vamos a preguntar a Lubomila Jordanova sobre este asunto. En primer lugar, para las empresas, tener esa conciencia que está explicando, ¿ustedes cómo las convencen? Porque hay algunas empresas que solo se fijan en su resultado, en el resultado económico, pero no tienen en cuenta otros factores, como algunos relacionados con el clima. ¿Cómo hacen para convencerles?
We have been working for the last decade in Germany as a starting point, and then we have moved all across Europe, including in Spain, supporting businesses to kick off this transition. It is not always the easiest because they are not informed, but we have now a very clear process that we follow that gives them confidence that sustainability and investment in sustainable projects results in also improvement to their bottom line. The most important 3 steps include, first of all, getting the whole company, starting with the board and the managing directors, to be involved and informed. Educational courses and some basic information about the cost of climate change are incredibly helpful. We always make it really clear to the industry in particular, to make sure that it's evident why, for example, a particular textile or commodity is a lot more expensive these days than it has been in the past. The second step that we take is actually to assess the status quo. We have a software platform, and also businesses, that don't want to use a software platform, they can also use, there's publicly available spreadsheets and other types to gather the data that is actually giving them an overview of their emission performance. And based off of this is the third step now, we do an analysis of where cost savings and optimization of resources can be done so that the business becomes more helpful to the planet, but also the business can be better economically. And just as your reference, for some of our industrial clients and for some of our fashion clients, we save on an annual basis between 3 and 50 million in annual spending related to materials, related to logistics and other. And that's only by pushing for sustainability initiatives to be implemented.
Hay muchas empresas o algunas que se quejan, especialmente en Europa, de que toda esta cuestión vinculada a ser cuidadosos con el medio ambiente y a ser sostenibles comporta para ellos una carga burocrática y que en Europa especialmente hay una excesiva regulación de este asunto y que eso, pues, por un lado va bien para el planeta, pero por el otro va mal para la empresa porque necesitan toda una estructura, necesitan un empeño mayor en desarrollar todas estas regulaciones. ¿Qué puede contestar a esta crítica que aparece a veces desde el mundo empresarial?
There is an unfortunate dynamic in the public discourse that pushes for institutions to be labeled as bureaucratic. I actually think that there's a concern for a change to happen. Unfortunately, climate change is pushing us to do this change, and this change is adding to financial accounting, carbon accounting. In the same way that we prepare financial reports like balance sheets and financial audits on an annual basis, we should have an overview of our impact on the planet. And it's a matter of gathering a few new KPIs that are all translatable in money. So it also speaks the language of every single stakeholder within a business. There has been, and I will be straightforward, a lot of discussion, especially in the context of the latest European Union legislation called the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, that this is overwhelming because it requires a lot new KPIs to be gathered. There has been a voice of confidence shared by the Commission, and they've now reduced the burden. There is a lot less to report on. Also, the companies that need to report are mainly the big ones, similar to how it is in Spain. And the new format is absolutely attainable for any business that believes that they should be allowed to exist for the next 10 to 15 years, which is why these reports are being gathered. I have the great honor to work as an advisor to the European Investment Bank, which is the investment arm of the European Commission. And I get to see the inner workings, which are also publicly available on the websites of the European Investment Bank, about the investments that are done in sustainability for us to have a better infrastructure, innovation associated to renewable energy. And what is visible is that with even a little bit of data, a lot better decisions can be made, plus a lot more investments can be unlocked. I believe it is worthwhile we spend time on putting together one report that is not that big of an effort if just a little bit of knowledge is gathered.
Luego también se habla bastante, ahora quizás menos, del greenwash, es decir, de esas empresas que quieren aparentar que son sostenibles pero realmente no lo son y que hacen algunos trucos, buscan algunas maneras también legales para evitar esa regulación. ¿Cree usted que esto va a menos? Es decir, que cada vez hay menos empresas que cometen ese greenwash y que cumplen, o que estamos igual que, no sé, hace 5 años.
The good news is that greenwashing is a bit difficult to do at scale as you were able to do in the past. And there's a few reasons for this. One is that consumers, and this is proven by data, are a lot more informed on sustainability, and they actually make conscious choices because they read the labels, they know how to read the information about the particular products, and especially in the context of Gen Z, which is at the moment one of the more popular purchasers, so to say, category of consumers, there is a really clear view of purchasing with your values first. The second reason why greenwashing is so difficult is because there is actually even again, on a European level, legislation that is looking at green communication, eco-labeling, and all sorts of claims that could be made. These green claims are now also to be checked, and if someone says we are climate friendly, planet positive, there is ways in which the legislator can go back to these companies and ask them to pay a fine if they are actually speaking something that is not backed by data, because the expectation is that you would say something, you can back it by data. This is since last year. I would add another point where I fully align with you that, of course, there is loopholes and there's ways in which companies have done this in the long run. And that is by masking the actions that you're not doing by focusing on something else. And this is maybe, I'll give a t-shirt example again, selling a fully polyester t-shirt, which is basically plastics, but then packaging it in paper or in recycled plastic, and not speaking about the product itself, but just by the packaging. There was a few fascinating campaigns that got absolutely demolished in media a few years back by McDonald's, where they actually announced that they're changing their packaging to fully biodegradable one, and people ended up asking, okay, but what are you doing to 99% of your emissions, which is the beef, it's the transportation, it is the heating that you use. So there is ways in which you can tell the truth, which is not the truth, but there is now ways in which this can be safeguarded, and this is due to education, and this is due to also legislation.
Le quería preguntar también sobre la experiencia del trato con las empresas, si ha visto un cambio generacional en los nuevos empresarios, los nuevos emprendedores, las startups, cuando son dirigidas o están lideradas por jóvenes, nuevas generaciones, respecto a las más veteranas, por decirlo de esta manera. ¿Ha visto una diferencia positiva en relación a esta conciencia climática?
Absolutely, absolutely. And what's most exciting is that the latest generations that are taking over wealth as well. So Spain is a fantastic example where you have so many family businesses, so many companies that have existed for decades, for hundreds of years, and this shift is happening all across the world. And these are businesses that are maybe inviting to the table of decision making the new generation, and this new generation is well informed. They're thinking about their future, their children, they're thinking about the children that they don't have yet. And they're scared that maybe if sustainability is not a topic that is taken seriously, there will be a lot of issues to even have a normal life, be it for their kind of own family, but also for all of their workers, all of their partners, and for the global economy in which they operate. What is most exciting is that this generation is really well equipped to use technology. It is well equipped to speak about values, and also understands that the pace with which the world is changing, even on a political level, is a lot faster than ever before. And they're willing to take a chance on themselves to be at the forefront of decision making. It really encourages me because we work with a lot of them, and actually they are heard, they are accepted, and their families are giving them the chance to be at the forefront of pushing this sustainable change, so to say.
Se lo pregunto también porque me imagino que usted, como nosotros, también los periodistas, estamos viendo las encuestas y la evolución también del pensamiento político en Europa y también en España, ¿no? Donde vemos que especialmente los jóvenes, o una parte de los jóvenes, están volcándose hacia la extrema derecha y a partidos que son negacionistas de la crisis climática. Y eso, claro, es preocupante porque son nuevas generaciones que parece que están haciendo oídos sordos de toda esta situación. ¿A usted le preocupa este declive, esta deriva que está teniendo en alguna parte de la juventud hacia estas ideologías negacionistas de la crisis climática?
It is really unfortunate to observe what is happening in the United States, for example. There's definitely a lot of movement on the far right also in Europe. And I have studied a lot of the reasons for this because I like to keep myself informed and involved in these discussions because at the end of the day, the future is shaped by a good combination of stable politics, stable economy, and a society that is healthy. And with this in mind, I feel like the biggest issue that we have is that in the fast pace with which technology is also coming into our lives, how information is consumed through social media and also through far-right media that might use traditional channels as well, there is lack of understanding of the correlation between action and result. Far-right is working with a very particular type of human segment that is a normal human being that might not, be fully informed on climate change, and they're using maybe this weakness, lack of information, to push the thinking into a direction where they translate this upcoming and existing challenge into something that they should consider as a financial burden to their own livelihoods. They should consider as a hoax that has been created by some people that are in charge. The truth is a lot simpler. If someone studies basic economics, they can see that our economy has not been doing well. And unfortunately, I can speak to the whole planet about this. And the economies that have been historically at the forefront of decision-making at the moment are creating a cacophony due to populism. What is a need for anyone that is listening to the far right is for their voices to be heard, and because we've dealt with a lot of issues, they might have not felt like their voices are heard. I believe, however, that digging into understanding, your life, not in the global context, but looking into your local community and then understanding that maybe some voices are a little bit amplified versus others through media, through social media, and voices that don't speak sense. And I've been living for 10 years in Germany, and I can unfortunately see this also with the far right there. They just erase a logical way of thinking about what makes up a good society. And let's be honest, I think even if someone has voted far right, they still want to live in a good safety field, safety, stability confirmed place. We just need to understand a little bit better the logic that we all follow. Eliminate any opportunity for some fake storylines that just don't exist, fake realities.
Puede tener porque claro, es curioso que los jóvenes que son generaciones bien preparadas, bien informadas, acaben comprando estos discursos, ¿no? Simplistas y negacionistas. Pero yo le quiero preguntar sobre si ha tenido que ver, cuál es su opinión, los mensajes a veces muy catastrofistas o excesivamente alarmistas por parte de la comunidad que defiende justamente el combate contra las crisis climáticas. Me refiero, por ejemplo, a ese término que se ha llamado ecoansiedad y que entre los jóvenes también ha sido muy, muy comentado. Como si hubiera un cierto agotamiento de estos mensajes de que el mundo se va a acabar y que eso puede haber influido en algunos jóvenes en decir, bueno, dejo de escuchar ese mensaje y me dedico a otra cosa, aun comprando esa ideología negacionista. ¿Cree que ha tenido algo que ver estos años de insistencia en que el planeta no está bien?
There is a term that used to be popular. I think I'm no longer in the generation that knows all the cool ways in which you communicate. That used to be YOLO, you only live once. And I think this mentality has definitely penetrated society from today's perspective. And this is mass consumerism. It's resulting in fast communication through platforms like Snapchat, TikTok, and also allowance for fast messages that are really quick, snap, only headlines, to make someone think in a particular way. I think after studying and working in the climate change sphere for the last 10 years, I probably to some people that know me might sound like an old record that has constantly been repeating the same messages. And that might feel about anyone that is within this field. Okay, we're 1.5 degrees, we're 2 degrees Celsius, we need to take action. The truth is, the reason why this narrative continues is because there's not been actually at any point of time effort that became the sole focus of governments, of businesses, to understand why they need to avert this long-term disaster. And we always put it as a side topic. It was a side project. This is fine as long as we were 30 years back. From today's perspective, we simply cannot go ahead with this. And just as a statistical reference, the only year in which we've been able to reduce emissions rather than increase them has been the year when COVID stopped the whole economy, the whole commerce on this planet. And within this year, we reduced by 7% the emissions on this planet. Unheard of anymore because we're now back to usual. You ask me, how do we navigate maybe an alarmist narrative like this eco-anxiety that for those of the people that are listening, it's new, is the idea that you live with anxiety, that it's the end of the world. I would frame it in a different way. Climate change is here, it is not going anywhere, and it's up to us to decide if we align to a scenario where all of us live uncomfortably, and I'm speaking about 1.5 billion people becoming climate refugees. There's data, statistics on this. And also, unfortunately, and with this I would finish, living at a larger scale what has been already experienced in Europe, especially when it comes to wildfires. This is touching lives of Spain, of Portugal, of even in England, there's absolute disaster sequence. And we just need to understand that maybe a few decades ago, we spoke about a fake reality that was not impacting our lives, and not today. From today's perspective, there is evidence and we live it. If that's not enough, I'm not sure. And if people get anxious, I unfortunately understand it. The most viable, valuable response is to be actually taking your day-to-day activities and job as an opportunity to make the more sustainable decision. And that's not to benefit someone that is making the reusable cups or their pocket, because actually the guys that make the reusable cups also used to make the non-reusable cups. So it's even in Spain, it's like that. It's just making sure that we all align to a pathway that is leaving us with a comfortable outcome.
Esta corriente ideológica en algunos países está frenando los planes justamente de la lucha contra la crisis climática. ¿Usted cree que puede esto realmente ser así más genérico? Es decir, que puede haber, en Europa me estoy refiriendo, pero también en otras partes del mundo, los países más contaminantes, puede haber un freno a esos planes que ya de por sí ya van lentos, esos planes de descarbonización y de lucha contra la crisis climática?
One of the big issues when you work on climate change for so many years is that sometimes you feel like you need to check in with yourself if you have the climate change filter on all the time. And when you're listening to a news, you're thinking, oh, how is this related to climate? I often listen to what is happening, for example, in the US, and I get absolutely shocked with some of the narratives that are being pushed there. Topics and storylines like powering again the economy with fossil fuels is absolutely a joke. And the reason for this is that sustainable energy, renewable energy, is costing at a fraction of what would be required to start now digging or even just continuing with the old types of supply of oil and gas. There's other examples where China has been doing an incredible job on scaling renewable energy, but also has been doing maybe, production of electric vehicles that is not so sustainable at the scale at which they do it, because through the subsidies of the government, maybe they're undercutting a market where we need products that stay for the longevity. It's something that can last rather than something that is short term. And essentially, I would say, just to sum it up, because I can give a lot of examples, unfortunately, climate change has been used to muddle the different approaches and narratives, making sure that it's kind of utilized as the topic that can always push people to be in a fear mode, in an anxiety mode. To me, the equation is really simple. Any economy on this planet will be impacted and is impacted by climate change. The calculations have been done by most of the economies, and they're publicly available on the United Nations website even. They now have been removed from the US websites, for example, because this has been what the latest government has done. And if you look at all of the statistics, the outcome is really simple. Economies are losing money if they don't take action on climate change, which could connect it to why the topic is preferred to maybe push the investments in certain industries versus others, because it's the final chance for fossil fuels to make money out of digging holes in the ground, because simply it doesn't make economic sense.
Sobre el tema de la tecnología, de la cual usted es experta también, le quería preguntar sobre el uso de la inteligencia artificial. Muchos jóvenes parecen ajenos a que el uso de esta inteligencia artificial consume mucha energía, consume agua, consume electricidad en cada uno de sus actos. Incluso se habla que crear una imagen por inteligencia artificial puede gastar entre 2 y 5 litros de agua, que es mucho más de lo que consume una persona al día. ¿Cómo se puede hacer para que estas nuevas herramientas tecnológicas, ya no solo la inteligencia artificial, sino otras, digamos, más primarias, dejen de tener esa huella de carbono y dejen de gastar tanta energía? ¿Es posible? ¿Esto es viable?
In Europe, yes. In some of the projects that are being pushed in the US, no. For the listeners, as a reference point, and thank you so much, Enric, that you mentioned this, half a bottle of a liter water is the equivalent of one search on ChatGPT, as per research that was done by the Washington Post. What this means is that we need to be mindful of when we use this technology. It's not because it cannot optimize our day-to-day really fast. Yes, it can. But because maybe using the old ways in which we used to find information, be it through books, be it through magazines, be it through other types of search options, makes it a lot easier and better for the planet. We use AI in planning, and I need to be honest about this. However, we have done it in a way that it makes it a lot more sustainable. And that is thanks to the partners that we work with. And that is thanks to the fact that we have understood the implications of the technology once we start using it at scale. The examples of how the technology can be made more sustainable is by making sure that the data centers that activate, fuel, and push for the research to be done on an AI search are using renewable energy. Not all of them are doing that. And there's ways in which you can check. You can even ask the different ChatGPT like platforms to make sure that they explain to you what kind of energy sources are being used. There's also ways in which the servers are being also cooled down. There's a lot of heating involved in running these big facilities with a lot of energy consumption, be it renewable even. There's cooling that happens even underwater. There's a lot of ways, and there's a lot of people that criticize it. So there's ways in which the technology can be done. What we have done is made sure that we select partners that work with renewable energy, optimize the search results themselves to not prompt you to speak continuously. One of the big issues with some of the tools that we have available, like ChatGPT, like Claude, like others, is that they have a good day when you ask more questions, because this is how they feed the record. This is how they train their models. If a conversation finishes with one query, that's better than 20, 50 questions that you end up asking consecutively, because each query basically goes through the same process of understanding what's going on. The final bit you asked, where does it work, where does it not? I wouldn't allow myself, I'm a technologist, to say that the technology doesn't work. I do, however, see that the way we use it is not necessarily making sure that it is the most efficient yet, and it's the most environmentally friendly. Additionally, there's probably a lot of knowledge now by the people that are listening that are within the technology space that a lot of investments have went into the space, sometimes for technology that is not yet proven. I believe that technology should only get investment if it's proven with its track record.
Entonces aquí el consejo ha hecho un consejo a nivel doméstico, individual, pero también a nivel de las empresas. El uso de estas herramientas también deberían tomar conciencia de que utilizar herramientas que se alimenten de energía renovable, de energía limpia. Ahí también hay que hacer un hincapié.
Absolutely, absolutely. And keep in mind that this information is publicly available. You can go on the website of Google, see what information they have shared about Gemini. There's a lot of information that they even shared. Google actually is a fantastic example. They have shared a report about their servers, their hosting, their AI in the company, and how it's fueled by energy. They're not doing so well, but they were open about it, so they actually showed this transparency. I advocate for such transparency by any company that is wishing to become a big player within this space, because this will allow them to gain the trust of people that are also concerned for the health of our planet.
Y ya para ir finalizando y para lanzar mensajes positivos, hemos visto en las últimas semanas algunas noticias que parecen positivas. El anuncio de China de reducir las emisiones de forma importante de aquí al 2035, y también informes científicos que dicen que el agujero de la capa de ozono parece que se va cerrando de nuevo. ¿Hay elementos para ser optimistas?
I am the biggest proponent of optimism. The only reason for this is that after a decade of working within this field, I've met the most incredible people, and I know that the efforts that are being put within the space are mindful to the economy, to the planet, and also to society. What we see now is definitely set of conflicting messages, and I'm sure that if people read your media, they can actually inform themselves well on climate change. I'm sure that this is not always the case in other channels, but what we have seen a lot is that the positive news is there. And what you mentioned about the ozone layer, this is an example of international coordinated action that results in positive outcome. This is decades of work, and now we're actually at the final stages of this really being, and just as an example, for those of you that don't know, there's something called aerosols, and this was essentially an element that was being used in a lot of products, including, you might know, deodorants and others. And a type of that was banned in order to make sure that the ozone layer closes, because they found out that this was the main reason for the opening. The ban happened on a global level instantaneously after scientific community gave a lot of information. And this resulted in really quick action, alignment, and decades after now we can claim success. The example of China is something really important as well, because China has up until now not shared publicly a commitment to reducing their emissions while investing heavily in renewable energy and other different initiatives. It is incredibly exciting and important to see these messages, and there's many channels through which you can do that, and even I use my platforms such as LinkedIn, for example, to share those. And the hope, it's not a matter of like biased, maybe not driven by confirmation through facts, reality. Rather the opposite. There's a lot of good things that are happening. We just need to make sure that we navigate a narrative about climate change that is realistic, that analyzes, identifies, and also acknowledges the facts, and only then takes ultimately action that is more mindful to the planet and to the economy. Because, as I said earlier, it's a matter of making it more comfortable for all of us, I think.
Pues nos quedamos con ese mensaje, seamos positivos, optimistas y que el futuro que nos espera sea mucho mejor si nos esforzamos un poco en este empeño. Muchas gracias, Lubomila Jordanova, por acompañarnos estos minutos en La Vanguardia y hasta la próxima.
Thank you so much for having me. Much pleasure.